This media member probably hates your team and wants them to die. This is Locked On Big 12. It's not me. I'm not the media member that I'm talking. It's not like a third person thing.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Oh, happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome to Locked On Big 12. I am Drake Toll from the planet Neptune. That's Robbie Triano, who invented testosterone. Thanks for making Locked On Big 12 the number one Big 12 podcast. Your first listen every single day. Robbie, Andy Staples at On3 said, your football team can shove it unless you're one of the lucky squads like a Utah going to the Big Ten or Oklahoma State, Kansas State, and Texas Tech going to the SEC in his latest projection, and everybody else in the Big 12 withering away and dying. When do you think about our friend, your friend, apparently you and Andy are bros, and how he believes that a select few Big 12 teams will join the SEC and the Big Ten and everybody else goes away, what comes to mind for you, my friend?
Hey, Drake. So let me just give a disclaimer first, because if anybody out there wants to aggregate this and clip it and send it to Andy and ruin him and I's relationship, because Andy and I go way back. Him and I worked at Sirius XM. I've worked a lot with him. I consider him a good friend. Andy Staples is the absolute man. And what Andy Staples does a really good job at, because I think he is one of the best voices in all of college sports. And if he were to write more, which he does now with On3, again, he wasn't for a bit, Andy Staples is one of the best writers in all of college sports. He's incredible at what he does. But what he does a really good job at is just discussing, all right, here's an idea. Let's build it out to see what it would actually look like if it did happen. And the idea of the Super League has been super scary, but I also think it's been the biggest talking point of this entire college football offseason, just because the idea is looming so much, and the SEC and Big Ten have kind of made that storyline when they team up and do this thing. So what would the Super League look like? If it was just the Big Ten and SEC schools, okay, but that doesn't necessarily get the whole country involved that I think a major league would want to do. So if it were to get the Big 12 schools or major Big 12 schools, that may potentially happen if a deal is so large and an invite is handed to an Oklahoma State or a Texas Tech or Kansas State or a Utah or whatever. That's a really intriguing idea that could happen, and it's definitely logical. And I don't know this is going to happen in a year or 2 years or how many years this is going to happen, but I do think this is a genuine concern for the Big 12 and the major Big 12 schools, and that's why I think Brett Yormark needs to try so hard to add other schools and bolster this league to maybe potentially fight back. But Andy definitely ruffled a lot of people's feathers with what he does, but I think he is just putting, he's just putting it out there. Hey, this may happen and this is what it may look like. And I don't think anybody likes what's going on.
Yeah, we have talked about how there is a realm in which the ACC falls apart, and obviously ACC fans don't like when that happens. We haven't discussed a realm on Locked On Big 12 in which the Big 12 falls apart, because we already had the whole, it's one of my favorite Craig smoke bites, who I actually really like, when Craig goes, well, that's it. Big 12's dead. It's over. It's done. And obviously the conference survived. So now the idea that it does go away in the end isn't one that's very fun. But what I think it's so wild about Andy's list here, who I will agree, this is kind of the Josh Pate thing. I disagreed with Josh Pate a week ago on his Big 12 rankings. And I disagree with Andy Staples here, despite actually liking a lot of his work. My thing is, where's the relegation? Like Northwestern, you are athletically saved, and Vanderbilt, you are athletically saved, and we're going to keep a Pitt out here. And look, I think Pitt's a good brand, but are they TCU? Like, are we valuing the market of Pittsburgh more than we are Dallas, Fort Worth? And Robbie, you're the guy that took TCU at number 1 overall when we drafted out Big 12 brands here recently. Like, how do you leave a brand like that off the table? And even take in somebody who mentioned like Texas Tech and the SEC. What are we doing here? It just doesn't make sense in my brain.
Yeah, and that's where I was really confused about that as well, because we just saw TCU in the national championship. We just saw them in Dallas. And I think when it comes to making a Super League, if they were to take teams, I think a lot of it has to do with the location of where it is, because West Virginia is technically in this Super League that Andy Staples is proposing. I don't think West Virginia is necessarily this major market, but it is the school of a state, and they do have some type of history, and they do have, I think culture to fit the SEC. But no, it is definitely confusing. And this is where I think we really need to kind of understand what exactly are the brands in the Big 12, because to us, TCU can be a major brand moving forward, but it's a private school in Texas. Like if you think about the schools that have the most people attending that school, TCU is not in the top 6 at all. They may even be like on the lower end of people who are actually going to TCU and people who, have alumni bases there. So when it comes to the profitability of these schools and like what exactly would get the most eyeballs, that's where I don't know if a TCU fits in, but also how about a BYU? I think BYU is maybe the most powerful out of all these. And I don't know if that's necessarily translated in TV ratings, but the potential of that is incredible. You could get an entire community and also great fans like me, because, I'm a diehard BYU fan. And if you want to get more fans like me, then you add BYU. Side tangent. But no, I think this is just a great idea from Andy, not necessarily great, but a really good proposal. But I do think this year a lot is going to shake out on which Big 12 schools are going to be nearing that Super League level.
See, I disagree wholeheartedly that this is a good idea or good proposal from Andy, because I don't think it values money enough, actually. Looking at 2022, which to me is the last really good tangible year we have in which the school reported their athletic earnings, Kansas was 3rd in the Big 12, 35th in the country. Iowa State was right behind them, and Texas Tech was 5th. Even West Virginia was above Oklahoma State. I also think that UCF has to be somewhere in here in consideration. We talk Orlando and that recruiting base, and the state of Arizona. We've now left the state of Arizona out of power college football altogether with this proposal, and instead we haven't relegated brands out like Purdue. We haven't relegated brands out, which a Rutgers, a Northwestern, right? Why are these schools still sitting here when Kansas gets left on the cutting room floor and we don't see them move into power level of college football? Which, before we move on into the Big 12 being behind the Big 10 and the SEC and why this could be a reality, Robbie, that is my next question here. In this format, if college athletics does go to the two conference realm, is that football only? Is there any way to do this with basketball notwithstanding?
Well, I think it would be really hard for, if they were to branch out and do their own thing, to go to an NCAA event. Could those teams go to the NCAA tournament if they just completely break away from the NCAA? And that's really scary. If there's a way to do football only, I think every school would rather sign up for that, just because, that just solves a whole lot of issues there. So I think that's what's going to happen. But you bring up a good point about the relegation of some of this. And this is where, if the Big 12 wants to survive, if the Big 12 wants to keep on existing and not be what the Pac-12 is, but also understand, hey, we might be screwed here. I want this to happen. And I think that this is the best thing for the future and how to keep people involved. Because if the Big 10 and the SEC do the Super League and they make their own championship, well, the winner, let's say Kansas State, they win their playoff, which doesn't include any Big 10 or SEC school. Does that necessarily mean a whole lot? I don't know if that necessarily will, because it will always be seen as the second most, you won't have the national championship. Yeah, exactly. And that's where this is what needs to happen to college sports if we are going to do this Super League thing. Is the Big 12 needs to become the league of relegation. And I understand it's going to be impossible for all these presidents and leagues to sign up and do this. And I understand this idea has been floating around forever. But if you want to keep these schools involved and keep fan bases involved when they know that they aren't necessarily in the party, this is what's going to need to happen. If you can find a way to earn to get into that league, you're going to care about an inferior product, which I use quote signs there, because we love this version of college football. But if you're not necessarily playing at the highest level, it's going to feel that way. So if the Big 12 becomes the league, if you're Kansas State and you win, you get to go to the Super League. And if you're Purdue or if you're Northwestern, you fall back to the Big 12. And that's a way to keep fan bases involved necessarily, because I do think the Super League is super polarizing and would definitely ruin some fan bases' ability to care about college football as much as they should.
The Super League would be the culmination of the Big 12 just being that far behind the SEC and the Big 10. How far behind is the Big 12 actually? This is Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, and it's every day. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. And guess what? When it's game time, you can go to the game because it's time. Or you can go to a concert. Game Time, you can buy tickets. You download the Game Time app and buy tickets to a concert. I saw Nick Shoulders last night. He was great. He's a folk singer. He's got a mullet, but he's got like blonde sides. And it was so good. And I bought the tickets last second for $25 a piece, which is a steal because that's what Game Time does for you. Last minute tickets, flash deals, zone deals. See the view from all the seats in the venue. Lowest price guaranteed, and event cancellation protection and job loss protection. If I get fired, I can still go to the concert because of Game Time. Make buying tickets easy. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account at Game Time. Redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Download Game Time today. Go to that concert. Go to the thing that you're going to go to for the tickets at Game Time. $20 off. Robbie of the Triano clan, the Big 12 is behind the SEC and the Big 10. And Andy Staples makes the case that the SEC Big 10 can kind of cherry pick which teams they want. A couple of you, and then they leave everybody else off the table. The Big 12 kind of goes away to like an NIT realm of college football. How far behind? Because like the Massey ratings would tell us the Big 12 has been the second best conference in college football over the last 4 out of the last 5 years. How far behind is the Big 12 really from these two leagues, especially as we move into this expansion era of college football?
I think when it comes to the top of the league, the Big 12 is far behind. And I think like that is what the SEC and the Big 10 have, is they have those programs that literally carry everybody else so much. And that's why I've made this point on your podcast before. That's why Oklahoma and Texas leaving really sucked. Just because you had those programs that could elevate to that level, like a Michigan to the Big 10 or Ohio State to the Big 10 or an Alabama or an LSU or a Georgia. Like those programs elevate everything up so much. So when it comes to being behind in that regard, 100%, I think the Big 12 is very much behind, and you can see it when it comes to recruiting. You can see when it comes to coaching. We love the coaching here, but I do not think there's a top 5 head coach in the Big 12 in this very moment. And when it comes to funding, they're definitely going to be behind because recruiting money, NIL, everything, those leagues are going to be winning. So where they are behind is that. Where the Big 12 is not behind is everything else but that, because I think that the depth of this league, and you and I have talked about this many times, the depth of this league is incredible. The depth of this league is what makes this league still being in the conversation here. Because if this league was just Oklahoma State, Kansas State, what's going to be Utah and TCU, and then a bunch of crap, this league would not be very good. It would just be a very inflated version of the American. But that's what this Big 12 has right now is, those other schools. That's the major selling point. But I do fear that for the future, as the other conferences have their media deals and they're getting more money and more eyeballs, and the Big 12 is still going to be behind a gap that they already had. That's where I fear for the Big 12, and that's where I feel for the coaches here, because I do think a lot of them will get poached if they do have success here in the Big 12.
Based on 2022 revenue numbers, if this conference was to bring in a Louisville, that's going to boost you up. Louisville 23 overall, according to the NCAA in finances in their athletic department. That's good. And when we talk about moving into the ACC and what they bring, like in North Carolina at 32, if the Big 12 was able to win a school like that, or Virginia Tech at 38, like there are different brands to bring in to close the gap between the Big 12, the SEC, and the Big 10. Do you think that's where you go next? Now does Brett Yormark just have to add to catch up?
Yeah, I think that has to be the route here. I think we need to just we realize that geography doesn't make any sense whatsoever at all. It just doesn't. And I think that which actually just sucks. And talking about all of this, I realized wow, we're talking about a lot of things that could just make the sport not what we like about it anymore.
It's not fun. Right. 100%.
And that's where I really fear about this sport is just people are all right, this is way too much change, but also change that I don't like. Like we lose so much of the regionality here. We lose so much of the rivalries that we cared about. It just like seems absolutely silly. And it just seems like, oh, we love this sport because of the amateur nature of it. And I don't think that NIL and the transfer portal have ruined that. I think realignment has ruined all of like what we love about college sports and how the networks are deciding who carries and who matters and like who does. So I hate all of this very, very, very much. But yeah, I think that is the route that the Big 12 needs to have if they want to not only survive, but also compete.
I think Arch Manning would agree with you. We need to keep the amateur aspect of what college football is.
Screw Arch Manning for that. Like, screw that. He would have been the number one most. He would have been the player that has been flipped to be the starter out of anybody in all of college football. Like people would have sent Quinn Ewers to the transfer portal in order to like make Arch Manning the starter, and for him to just like say, nah, I don't even get the benefit for it. It helps him out with his NIL money.
On the game, man.
But it's like, what do you mean focus on? You're not playing the video game. like this is what is like so stupid. Like Arch Manning, like I don't get it. I think he probably would have been worried if the ratings came out and he's the backup and he was like a 78. Because everybody's dunking on him like, you don't have the ratings. And it's like, that's the only reason why.
The best tweet that I've seen is, as someone who has created a 99 overall quarterback with my own name, I can attest it does distract you between 20 and 30 hours a week. So maybe he just didn't want to play as himself. I don't know. I do know, though, before we get to college basketball, because this is March, that in revenue terms, Maryland's a Big 12 school. Georgia Tech's a Big 12 school. Right? Those are two schools that are below Texas Tech. UCLA even is a Big 12 school. There are brands like Ole Miss and Mississippi State and South Carolina that are right around that category, right? So I'm with you here. I just don't think, sure, that top 20 is, there are no Big 12 teams. But outside of that, you look at half the SEC, a good portion of the Big 10 that are just Big 12 schools.
Yeah, definitely. And that's where, like, us as the consumer, we have to decide what we necessarily value. Because I think hardcore college football fans see the Big 12 and it's like every game I know I get something I enjoy. But in terms of the casual, in terms of just like the people who just like want to watch a really good matchup, like, would you rather eat a prime, really good steak, or would you rather eat stew? Like, we love stew. Like, stew is a combination of some of our favorite things, but you necessarily, like, you would rather just have that really, really nice steak, like in Alabama or in Michigan. Like, to the casual person, what is more attractive? Like this seafood stew, like if you talk about The Big Short, like, would you rather have the seafood stew or the seafood soup, or it's like a combination of good things, but on their own it doesn't stand up, or would you rather just have the really good steak? And that's where the Big 12 like has their biggest issue, because they do not have that name brand thing. And I don't know necessarily how they get that name brand thing unless they just have a constant winner. And that's what, like, you and I have talked about this again, and I've said this a lot this episode, but like the Big 12 just needs a school to win. They need to go in the college football playoff and win and prove it, and don't fall flat on their face and don't lose by 60 points in a national championship game. They need someone who can win and prove that they can do it, and now elevate the rest of the league and make this league respectable. So Oklahoma State, TCU, Utah, Kansas State, anybody else, do that and the league will flourish, and Brett Yormark will just be incredibly happy.
Create a Clemson. Create your own, build your own Clemson. That's where they were 15 years ago. Robbie, that right there, that little like minute and a half, that clip, that was really, really good. I'm proud of you.
Oh, cool.
This is Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every BYU's good at basketball day. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors. I go and I drive. Do you drive? Keep your car alive at ebaymotors.com. It's the easiest thing to do in the whole world, like literally the world, is to go to ebaymotors.com. Passion, drive, and patience brings home the winning trophy. Say that your car is broken. You're like, oh, my car is broken. eBay Motors will fix it with superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. It's the cheapest, easiest, best way to do it, with a guaranteed fit, too. 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. Your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Burn rubber, not cash. The prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP. ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit, only available to U.S. customers. ebaymotors.com. Funniest thing, it's like 2 a.m. in the morning, in the a.m. Robbie calls me. deep panic. He's sweating. I can tell through the phone, and says, "You had a dream that BYU basketball won March Madness. Why you called me, I don't know, but I'm glad you shared this with me. And you also told me you'll be getting a BYU tattoo, which might be antithetical, by the way. If they win March Madness, I know you're a big tattoo guy. Robbie, I know that you are pretty high on BYU basketball, which you should be the only thing you're high on, by the way. Again, kind of antithetical.
Right. That very good point. And that 2 a.m. call, I was just feeling lonely. I put on Marvin's Room. I called you, and I was like, you know what? I really need to get off my chest. It's how good BYU is at basketball. And this is not a team that I've necessarily cared a whole lot about. I'm a college basketball fan, but I'm also a Big 12 fan. And for years before, I didn't necessarily care about BYU basketball unless like Jimmy Fredette was on the basketball team. So this year, getting a chance to like sit down and watch this brand of basketball, it is something that is unlike I've seen in the Big 12 so far, and like something that is the epitome of the future of basketball and what we've seen in the NBA. And that is shooting a whole lot of 3-pointers. If you want to guess where in the country, if you were to guess where BYU is ranked in terms of 3-point attempts per game, Drake Toll, where do you think they will rank out of every college basketball team?
BYU would rank, I would say, 33rd.
They are number 2 in the whole country in 3-point attempts with 32.3 attempts per game. It's pretty remarkable. And they're also hitting it at a 35% clip. That is also really, really good. If you were taking that volume of shots like they are making right now, the third most 3-pointers per game with 11.3 a game. And that's really good. And this team is incredible at distributing the basketball. Ali Khalifa has been my favorite player that I've seen this year. And I've waxed poetic about him because he's just this Jokic looking guy who just like stands. He doesn't necessarily move a whole lot on defense, but if like you are caught napping for a second, he'll toss the perfect backdoor cut. This team has shooters. This team has ball distributors. They have big men. They know how to rebound. I really like BYU a whole lot. And I think this is a team that can compete and go far in the tournament. But also this is a team that could lose in the first round of the tournament because they are so reliant on shooting. Shooting. Go ahead.
I think Noah Waterman, but specifically Marriott Center Noah Waterman, is my dad. I think he's my favorite dad. You're a close second. There's part of that. Part of that is they shoot the ball a lot, but their defense has gotten so much better. Shot quality rates their defense in the top 25 of the country, which is like, where did this come from? They seem to have adjusted to play more defense. Like Mark Pope's midseason adjustments have been insane. My thing with this though, does this diminish what the Big 12 is? The fact that this team from the WCC, who was the middle of the pack in the WCC, 5th in the league last year, walks into the Big 12 and doesn't just compete in year one, but will be a 4 seed in March Madness. Does that say something? Does that mar the Big 12? Like, how do you digest this?
That's a really good point. I don't know if I've necessarily thought about it because this definitely makes an Oklahoma State, a West Virginia, even like Oklahoma, even though they're leaving, like the programs that have been there for a while. And if you see BYU, who we thought they were going to enter the Big 12, is like one of the worst basketball teams because they haven't proven that on net. So like, I definitely agree with that, but I also think it's very good for the Big 12 to have a team like this emerge and come to this level, just because I think the more better programs you have, the better. And I do think it's like amazing that we've seen Mark Pope, like he hasn't necessarily had the success at the highest level. And for him to enter the Big 12 and like kind of be like, hey, I'm a really good coach here. I know if I can get talent in the transfer portal, I can build and make a team that works. And I committed to it. Like I've read stories from The Athletic about like him making this team. And he was like, you know what? We're really good at 3-point shooting. Why don't we just do that a whole lot and let's buy into that? And I think like they're doing something because in this league that is so physical and is so hard, like how can you necessarily moneyball your way to be really successful? And I do think BYU did that. Like offensively, they're currently 9th according to KenPom in the entire country. Defensively, like 56, not very good, especially when you see the top of, the Big 12 has some really good defensive teams. Like the top 2 teams in KenPom are in the Big 12 of Houston and Iowa State. So good for BYU. And like, I don't think that necessarily diminishes the rest of the league. I just think it's like, wow, we didn't realize how good of a product we had with BYU here.
Yeah, we've been knowing that Kansas is good at the basketball thing, right? Like that's always been a thing. And BYU went to Allen Fieldhouse and beat them. It's like that's not just BYU. Like, oh, they got lucky their first year in the Big 12. No, Kansas is good on the national scale. Everyone knows this. Kansas is good. You can't overrate Kansas. BYU beat them in Allen Fieldhouse. It's not a fluky thing, and it doesn't mean the Big 12 is bad. It doesn't mean Kansas is bad. It doesn't mean, these are power programs that are losing to the upstart Cougs. They were like, you know what? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to have a little 1-2 bunch of three-pointers. Then in the middle of the season, they'll say we can't play defense. And then once we're confident, we'll start playing defense. Mark Pope, genius. Robbie, if there was a Cougar right in front of you right now, what would you do?
Probably die. I think a Cougar would definitely, I would try to befriend the Cougar just because, if I can do that, that increases my chances of survival. If I was facing a BYU Cougar, I may be able to get past its defense. If I was facing a Houston Cougar, I think I might be screwed because defensively, every attack that I would have would just be negated by them and they would just kind of put me into submission. That was a segue to me saying I think Houston's going to win the national championship. I think they're an incredible basketball team. And we haven't necessarily, seen a team emerge in college basketball. That's the team. But yeah, I think a Cougar would definitely kill me. So I would have to befriend it or just become one of them. Be like, accept me into your tribe.
Yeah, if Houston stays healthy, which, if they, yeah, you need 5 guys. You just need 5 guys in March. Win me 2 games in a weekend. Win me 2 games. The starters can play 40 minutes. That's fine. That's fine. Just win me 2 games. Do you have any questions for me?
Yeah. How are you doing?
Mythical for sure.
If you were to Big 12 tournament next week, I saw that they made food and they did food for it. Does that interest you?
I missed the Wabash hot dog thing. There was an undercooked boiled hot dog that it looked like rotten caviar on top of it. I don't know why they did away with that. And then the funniest thing is they're like, you know what? Screw it. Just give Kansas State a peanut butter and jelly. That's literally their food this year is like the Wildcat PB&J. What?
That's really smart on that staff because they're like, all right, what's the thing that would give people the least amount of food poisoning? All right, here, because I remember that hot dog. Oh my God. That is, you're in the start of the second half. You're not even watching the game. You're just sitting on that toilet, just absolutely, oh my God, evacuating the dance floor. Really
letting it come back out. I hope more than anything that Oklahoma State wins the Big 12 tournament or West Virginia. I am hoping that everyone decides to fall on their own sword and let the kids have it. They deserve it.
How do you feel about Big 12 basketball as a whole this year? Just in terms of, I don't think there's necessarily a star power to the league. There isn't Hunter Dickinson and there isn't Kevin McCullough, but Kevin McCullough's been hurt and Hunter Dickinson has just kind of been a flopper crybaby who has good stats, but his team has been kind of floundering lately. How have you viewed this league in terms of, star power, their impact on college basketball this year? Because I think some really good teams are here, but I don't know if we necessarily have oh my God, that guy.
Yeah. What's interesting is the Big 12 doesn't have the most elite teams in the country, but it has the most great teams. So look 1 through 10, most your analytics sites probably only give you 1, maybe 2 Big 12 teams. They're really valuing an Alabama or a Purdue or a UConn, and Houston's the only one from the Big 12 getting a lot of love. But then you go from 10 to 25 and it's here's the entire Big 12. It's just all Big 12 teams. So I still... It feels like the most balanced conference maybe in history. I don't know if anybody's ever had 9 teams that were this good, legitimate contenders. And to me, it stretches to 11 because Cincinnati any given night or Kansas State any given night could be even much better than Texas and Oklahoma. So yeah, I feel like if I had to give Big 12, I'd give it good.
Yeah, and that's where I don't know if it's going to make up the margins for everything we talked about earlier. But hey, I'm the host. Welcome to Locked On Big 12. I'm Robbie. So yeah, that's where I think
that's good that you said that. I feel like a hi, I'm Robbie would kind of be a good name for you.
That would be a good name. Maybe I could start a YouTube channel. Oh wait, I did. Oh man,
great segue, Robbie. Where can people find your stuff?
Yeah, go to. I almost said Locked On Robbie. That's the other podcast on. Yeah, we go to Locked On Robbie. Go to the YouTube channel. Hi, I'm Robbie. I have a video dropping soon about Patrick Mahomes and Texas Tech. that is intriguing as well. And also another thing I can't announce, but just like follow me on Twitter and I'll announce it and it'll be cool. And I hope you enjoy that. But yeah, Drake, I always love coming on here and I'll tell you about it right after we hang up.
I always love you more. Okay, bye. All right, that was Robbie Triano. Thanks for everybody that watched the show today or listened to the show, and come back tomorrow for more sports. This has been and always will be Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Dose Grande.